Yeah, so we are going to be making that bass sound, baby. So let's dive right into it. So to start off, there are 3 layers to the bass sound. If we were to solo it up on the bass submix, which is this guy right here, there is, and this should be going into it, but it's not. There is 2 sample library layers, and there is a Zebra 2 that provides the sort of the girth, while these provide the, the top layer, the texture, the stuff. But the stuff that's carrying the power is going to be Zebra 2. The layers themselves are pretty simple individually, which is typically the way you have to go if you want to make something cool when they're all combined. So just let's take this out too. Just the bass sound that we're looking at here. That's Zebra 2. If we bring in the top layer. And then if we bring in the Rickenbacker bass, which I don't know why it's not playing here. It should be playing. There we go. Had to unmute the submix. I know this says woodwinds. It's part of a template. This should really be going down over to the submix anyways. But we're just going to ignore all that for now. So anyways, there's the 3 layers. Let's dive into the first of them, the main bass layer. That's going to be this MIDI up here. If you're curious about the MIDI, this is what it is. And I have these gaps so that the kick can fit in quite nicely on these things. And there is a little bit of swing on. All right, so let's take a look here at what's going on inside of the bass, which is down here. So it's a Zebra 2. Pretty simple patch. Not a lot complicated. Nothing going on in the effects inside of Zebra 2. We've got an oscillator coming out. It's a single stack oscillator. Some cool stuff actually can happen when you go for like a quad. Which is cool, but it was a little too much when combined with the layers. So I went back to a single mode for this. I did check out some of the wave shapes available here and sort of just selected one. I'm on the Tri-Saw Pulse wavetable, and this is the wave that I settled on. It sounded nice, and it worked well. For the effects in the mixer, I used to have effects here. In particular, where's the one that says phase in it? The phase distortion and a few others. But again, it wound up pumping up the sound in a way that got in the way of some of the layers, and I preferred the layered version over it. So I decided to keep it simpler and just stick with just the raw oscillator output. So that's coming out. We hit a distortion. So without this distortion, that's what it sounds like. So the distortion itself is on rectify and it's dual band shelf. I kind of just tried several distortions, picked a center frequency that I thought sounded cool and brought up the post tilt a little bit. Didn't have to touch it too much. I was just kind of looking for like a low subby support thing. That was pretty much it. And I didn't plan on having to worry too much about sidechain since I was going to write the bass line to specifically be out of the way of the important kick drum hits. So now for the snare, I'm probably going to have to deal with some sidechaining for that, as we'll see a little bit later. And then finally, we have the filter. So the filter is the low pass old drive. I thought it just sounded dope. There's an LFO, but I turned the depth off. The LFO really isn't doing anything anymore. Set the cutoff and brought the drive up. I used to have this be a little bit more resonancy, which gives you these cool things. And I thought about automating that, but I decided no. I'm going to have some other elements that are going to come in later that are going to carry some melodic stuff, like some choirs and things. So I don't want this to be poking up in that region. So I decided to just sort of leave this alone. And that's pretty much the patch. Pretty straightforward patch. Now it is coming in to mixer channel 25. And I've been recently of late coding the bass patches just straight black. So if it's black, it's probably a bass. This is the submix form. And we hit first a smart reverb. And this just adds some space to the sound. And this being early in the chain is important because it's going to hit a Waveshaper that's going to yank this verb way up. So if we take out this verb, that's what it sounds like. You know, no space at all. And then with it, so I quite like that as an effect. I think it sounds cool. Now, one thing that I might experiment with later is perhaps removing some of the low end, but this verb is very short, 0.2 seconds. So not the longest verb on the planet. And also, I've kind of done a low pass, so to speak, in the decay profile. I brought in all the low end stuff and basically said decay very, very quickly. And then the high end I've dragged out with this sort of strange shape in the mid. So that's the verb. This is the sonable smart verb, if you're curious. So kind of a cool thing. Now over here, we've got the Waveshaper. Waveshaper's job is just to pull up that high end. Without this, it just kind of falls flat. This tiny little thing. Yeah, because a lot of the information, especially the verb, is going to live in this region. And this yanks it up like crazy. And also is partially responsible for some of that gated kind of sound that we're hearing. Along with the short verb. The short verb is important for that. Then finally we have the Q3. Q3 is doing a couple things. It's doing some stereo shaping. So we've got some boost in the side channel. And you can get away with just more in the side channel typically. Some low mid cuts. This is to sort of make it play nicer with the drums. And then just a general stereo cut also. And I was just sort of looking for an interesting resonancy pocket. Without this, the image collapses a little bit. Just straight down the middle, all that mid, this resonancy bit stays the same. So we go ahead and add that in. Yeah, and I thought it'd be interesting to have some small movements and just, you know, tonally vary it up a little bit at longer notes. So that's what this is doing over here. Then we hit the Maximus. This is a multiband compressor, and I grab it typically to just yank up the mids and the highs. Without it, that's what it is. Because with the EQ, we're removing a lot of stuff. So we got to put it back to some extent, and that's what this does. And then finally, I do have a fruity limiter on here, forward side chaining with the kick bus. And I'm using a kick bus because I do have two kick drums and they hit at different times, and I want that to be affected on it. So that's what this is doing here. And when you put all that together, you get a pretty cool bass sound. So that's what's going on there. Now, the automation under this, there is some frequency automation for the EQ going on. So we've got EQ automation, and then these are automations inside of Zebra 2 itself. So if we go really quick, look at these while it's playing. You can see the cutoff actually moves a little bit with every phrase. Yeah, just at the beginnings and ends, as we could see here. And there's a couple of little level moves, just sort of tiny stuff. And then this is the band that's moving inside of the Pro Q3. So that's what the automation is going on in here. And then altogether, you get a pretty cool bass sound. And again, you'd have to come in and sort of customize these curves if you're going to play longer notes or change it up. But it's all sort of nicely packed into one little area. So that's the first layer. Second layer, the other layers are far less complicated. Well, I mean, you know, kind of a similar chain. So this layer over here is for brass stabs. So I have this brass library that is playing some stabs along with it. And we've got some monster low-end brass and some other things. And we've got our brass and winds. So the monster low-ends come in on the stabs at the ends of the phrases. And then I kind of hunted around for a while. Wow, it's taking a long time for the UI to show up. So this is it. That's the patch. The BKN 50 Retreat is what I went with. And I basically didn't really mess with it. I just sort of sent it out. So that reaches out to here. And one of the issues with this, when you're dealing with sample libraries, the verb is just kind of, I didn't want the super long verb, but I liked the verb when it was on. So I have here at the very end of the chain a fruity fast low pass. And this thing is a low pass filter that's almost more like a gate in some ways. So that's what this automation here is. And I matched it with the phrase, but you see I let some of these ring out longer than others. And on the long notes, they ring out the most. And let me go ahead and solo it up. And you can hear the stab from the monster low end coming as well. And on here, I've got just sort of a general shape for the brass without this. Here it is with it. So just sort of taming it a bit, making it play a little bit nicer with the kick. There is a Waveshaper doing a very sort of strange shape. This will pull up the high end. This will tame out some of the mid-range, and then it pretty much tames the high end. So the super loud stuff can't be quite as loud. It's basically kind of like a crazy-looking compressor curve, where this would be like pulling things up, and this would be pulling things down. That's what the Waveshaper does. Again, similar reasoning to why we had one on the zebra patch. Then we hit a Maximus. Now this one, again, has sort of a strange one where I'm pulling up quite aggressively. And then I go back to being linear for the highest parts of the sound. So if stuff ever gets this loud, it just won't be changed that much. And then, yeah, low end has actually been reduced some because, I've got the bass doing that, so I don't need as much. So this just will turn down the bass some. And then the mids also have a slight reduction. And this is going to be like this is like verby territory, like the really, really small stuff in the signal. So without this, with it, so that high end getting pulled up is basically the job of this guy. There's some like low and mid conditioning, but it's mostly this that matters. Like the green, that's the difference there. Like the white's what's coming in, and that's what we're putting out. So some pretty large differences. So you can see over here what it looks like, and then on the lows. Now the purple means that stuff, actually I'm not entirely sure on purple. Don't quote me on the purple. I have to look at what all the colors mean again. But you can just look at the curve and sort of interpret it. We, again, have a sidechain. I believe this is also kick bus. Yeah, kick bus coming in, sidechaining to clear that up. And I'm considering about doing it with the snare, but at the same time, I think it might work the way it is. The snare tends to actually not be in the way too much. Or this stuff tends to not be in the way of the snare too much. And then finally, yeah, we have the low pass that we talked about. The last thing that we have in this chain is the Rickenbacker bass. And this just has an EQ on it, some low-end shelving, and some high-end stuff. I think this is actually a low pass, if I recall. But, yeah, just some basic, very, very broad strokes at the high end, not very big at all. And if we come down, and if you're curious what the library is, it's this one. It's the palm-muted Rickenbacker bass with the on-the-road preset. This was not a lot of thought was put into this. The majority of my time was spent shaping the underbelly of the bass sound, making it fit nicely. And when you put all of them together, you get a really nice full bass sound. So the bass adds just a little bit of extra chug to it, a little bit of mids, and it helps a little bit with the low end. But the low end's really being carried by that zebra patch. And then to deal with the high end, because it could be a pain to try and get one patch to do it all, I have these brass stabs that are sort of taking care of that. So all that together builds our bass patch. And then the writing for it is, again, I took some care to make sure that notes were in clear so that these spots where big drum elements hit happen nicely. I thought it'd be kind of a cool rhythmic idea. And then originally I had this choir that actually came in right here with the fill, so I'm still arranging some of this. But if we come over here, there's actually a choir that gets introduced. Which it's very quiet. I might have opened an older version of the project. Anyways, this is what the choir sounds like. It's supposed to be a lot more aggressive and big, so I'm going to check that out. That should not sound that way. But, yeah, it comes in, and there's going to be this, like, sort of driving force down, and then we might go into a B section or another version, like some other different rhythmic cadence. I don't know. There's some options. But yeah, pretty cool. Very fun track to make. It is going to be good. One's called Ground Contact when it eventually gets done. If you have any questions about this patch or anything that you saw, feel free to drop them in the comments. Subscribe and hit that bell icon for future videos. And have a blessed day.